Our distinguished guests, experts in the field of corruption and anti-corruption, women's rights. Dialogue of the African Governance Platform, an annual dialogue, which we call the High-Level Dialogue on Democracy, Human Rights and Governance in Africa, Trends, Challenges and Prospects. All these conversations is an attempt on the part of the African Union and its organs, working with the regional economic communities to ensure that citizens become the center point of our engagements, of the issues that we handle and the issues that we tackle and grapple with at various levels, and to ensure that your voices become a critical part of policy making on the continent. All of these conversations that we've had with the youth at the regional consultations and the ones we're starting this morning, or we've already started with the very beautiful speeches we had during the welcome session, would feed into the conversations that would also happen and start on Wednesday at the High-Level Dialogue, and ultimately be part of deliberations of the AU Summit in 2019. Therefore, these conversations, all of these conversations are very important, and we hope that, and we're very sure that we have in this room very esteemed scholars, practitioners, activists, academics who've written and who continue to research on many of these issues that we'll be dealing with over the next 2 days. My name is Ibrahim Sanusi. I am a member of the AGA Secretariat, and I will be coordinating the proceedings with you this morning. First and foremost, I'd like to take political responsibility for some of the mix-up that we had in the morning during the opening session. As many of you might be aware, we've had a bit of challenge with flight connections and quite a number of issues. So many of them have affected our planning in one way or the other. So I would apologize to many people who would also have the urge to interpretation in 4 languages. I'm not sure if this has been announced earlier, but if it hasn't, Arabic is on channel 1 for our colleagues from North Africa and the East African Arabic-speaking country, Sudan. We have French on channel 2. We have Portuguese for our colleagues from the Portuguese-speaking countries on channel 3, and we have English on channel 4 for every one of us. I've been told also that there have been requests for speeches. We would upload the speeches on the website, and it will be tweeted. Once that is done, we will let you know, but we'll make sure that you have access to the speeches that have been presented earlier today. Without wasting any more of our time, we would go into the keynote presentation session this morning. The idea of the keynote presentation is to look at the issue of corruption as a barrier to gender equality on the continent. Our moderator will be our friend and brother and colleague, Joab Okanda. Joab is with Oxfam. He is the Financing for Development and Inequality Advisor at the Pan-African program based in Nairobi. Let's put our hands together as I welcome Joab to the podium. And we're very much honored to have joined us this morning the chairperson of the board of one of the longest and most prominent women's rights organization on the African continent, and I dare say globally, Madam Emma Kalia, who is the board chair of EDFED. Hands together for Madam Kalia. And as the discussant of the presentation that will be made by Madam Kalia, let's put our hands together. So we would run this for roughly about an hour and 15 minutes. At this point, I would like to hand over to Joab to take the floor. Joab, please. Yeah, you can sit there. Yeah.
Thank you, Ibrahim. From this morning, I think we've all come to understand that women are the collateral damage for corruption. We've come also to know that corruption is not only a barrier to gender equality, but it has the potential to reverse the gains made on achieving women's rights on the continent. So today, to take us through how corruption is a barrier to women's rights on the continent, we have our presenter, Mama Emma Kalia, whom I'll just give a brief bio of her. For the past 25 years, Mama Emma has been a gender and women's rights activist. Currently, she chairs the board of Femnet. She's also the chair of the SADC Gender Protocol Alliance. Mama Emma strongly believes that societal change is about empowering the grassroots, especially women, to take up new challenges as leaders in their own right. She believes in the principle of helping others to help themselves. So she believes in empowering communities to fight for their own rights. Then our discussant, Miss Abigail Jima. She's the project coordinator for Ghana Integrity Initiative. This is the local chapter of Transparency International. She has experience working with the UNDP for democratic development, the International Democracy and Elections Assistance, and the Youth Bridge Foundation. Abigail holds a master's in conflict security and development from King's College. She also holds a BA in political science from the University of Ghana, and she also has experience in journalism. Without further ado, I'd like to welcome Mama Emma to give us her presentation.
Thank you, moderator. Good morning, Excellencies. Good morning, colleagues. Good morning, the media. I don't want to forget the media. In South Africa, there's an issue about media as I'm talking now. I did not want to forget. First and foremost, let me bring you greetings from Malawi. I'm from Malawi. And more so messages of solidarity and friendship from the women and girls who champion the very cause that brings us here in Gaborone. We are all part of the gender equality and women's emancipation struggle. I will start with a very small quote. There's this woman I'm not going to mention from Africa who said, and I quote, "You know, the rich few in my country steal so much and amass so much massive chunks of wealth, and so the gap between the rich and the poor is so huge that it makes the poor look like the middle class." This is a woman in a very small village somewhere who feels that she should have been assisted, but she's not assisted because there are a few people that are amassing so much wealth and that the poor still remain very poor. The young girls, the women, are the most disadvantaged. So she's speaking on behalf of all of us. I'll be quite brief because I realized that most of the issues that I had prepared were covered in the three speeches that came out during the official opening of the session. However, I think it is still important that we do mention, as a women's rights organization, and the whole of Africa, that issues of corruption are affecting the women and the girls more than anyone else. I'll speak to the issue of corruption in the public sector. When we talk about the public sector, I'll start with the public sector because we feel that the public sector has an obligation to take care of all of us. And therefore, when it is happening in the public sector, it disadvantages all of us. You can imagine how much money we are losing within the public sector, especially in those governments that are still having problems to curtail practices of corruption. I'm coming from a country because I just have to give examples. For instance, in Malawi, most of you may have been hearing about this story. They call it Cashgate. Cashgate is nothing else apart from corruption. A lot of money was taken out of the public system by means of corruption, using what they call IFMIS. I don't know, the government people know that better. Where they have access to a lot of money, a few people amassing a lot of wealth. At the end of it all of us suffered because even those that were supporting the budget, budget support was stopped. In terms of the state and all of us is that in public hospitals, you do not find drugs. You do not find proper facilities in schools. You do not find the road infrastructure is bad. As I'm talking now, those who have been in Malawi will agree with me that we may be one of the countries that has the worst road infrastructure. Why? Because money is going into people's pockets. I'm giving this example of my own country because I don't want to be talking about other countries. However, this is cutting across maybe Africa. In many countries, these things are happening. What about the women that are dying? There are so many women that are dying in hospitals because there are no drugs. When I watch the Yemen situation and I sit there and I say, it's not the men that are suffering, it's the women that are suffering with those children. If you watch that video where this woman is just cooking very little for her family, then you know what happens with all what is happening in terms of corruption and how women and the girls suffer more than the way men would suffer. When you talk about issues of maternal health, who suffers more? If we have bad road infrastructure, to pick people, especially women from rural areas, to come to the main hospitals, it becomes a problem. But money is going into people's pockets. What are we saying? Look at even the way our children in many countries, they are failing to continue with education. They cannot even afford school fees when other people are still keeping a lot of money in their pockets. What about the disabled? The director talked about the disabled people. What happens to them? Infrastructure, there's no infrastructure for the disabled people, but some people are keeping so much money. At times I ask a question to say, why should somebody build a house like a hotel when there are only 2 people living in that house? Is this the real money or this money was gotten from elsewhere? I'm not accusing people who have so much money that they can build a house like a hotel where they're not even living in, when other people are suffering out there? These are the questions that we keep asking ourselves to say, when are we going to liberate Africa so that we are seeing an Africa that is free from corruption and that it is developing? The issue of multinational companies has brought in a lot of misery at times. Some are celebrating, but it's also encouraging. This is private sector encouraging corruption in some of our countries, where multinational companies, and some of them, they are not doing the right things. Instead of just coming to invest, they are the ones who are also at times perpetrators of corruption because they want to get a good deal. The transnational companies, they don't even comply to, most of them, they don't even comply to anything. They'll just move all the way because they know that they have steps up there. They'll just move up and do what they know best by just paying someone, and they'll be able to thrive on corruption all the time. At the end of it all, they leave a lot of problems in our countries. The issue of extractive mining, women are left behind. You still see it is still the big companies that are taking over, and that the women are left behind to do these small things. And usually, we call it, in my country, they give you a business of chicken. You understand, fellow women? They will say women can deal with chickens. You give a business of chickens to women when you know that one day when they do not have food in the house, they will just kill the same chickens and feed the children. These are the questions that we start asking where we are left at the tail end of development activities when we are talking of Agenda 2063. What is this Agenda 2063 when the women are left behind because there's so much corruption that you cannot even penetrate where these people are sitting? My colleagues in Femnet, they have this saying, they always say it. If you are not on the table where they discuss, you'll be in the menu and then you'll be eaten. So we are seeing this every day. It is happening. I cannot be sitting on the table where people discuss huge business because what is discussed there usually goes through systems of corruption, and the women are not good. There are not many women who are corrupt. There are some, very few of them, but most of us are not, and I'm not one of them, who is corrupt. That's why they do not like us, because if you are not corrupt, what discussion are you going to make on that table? Because you'll be stopping the corruption like the former minister in Nigeria who was stopping corruption, and you become hated, and they follow you, and they think you are an enemy because you are not part of them. You are not part of the clan of corruption. And therefore you see that many women will not be part of systems because they know that when she comes on this table, she's going to dispute, she's going to reject corruption, and she will not be part of us, and she's going to go out and reveal. It is not hidden that most women that are in leadership, they do better because they are not corrupt. The room is quiet because they think that we are not telling the truth, but we are telling the truth, that most women leaders are not corrupt. And that's why at times they do not even last, because you are one odd out in that system where they thrive on corruption. If Africa needs systems that are governed properly. Africa needs us as people, because as we were sitting here, somebody was saying here, it's not only in the public sector, it's not only in the private sector, it's also in NGOs. I come from NGOs because we have to be honest with ourselves. In my country, we have a huge story for those who have followed about us NGOs, how we are managing certain resources. And that money goes into our pockets as well. So it will not just be about public sector. The public sector, because they have an obligation to take care of all of us. That's why maybe we talk about public sector. But it is about all of us stopping this corruption. Because if the public sector stops, then if NGOs are still doing it, if the private companies are doing it, then the corruption is not going to stop. So what we are simply saying is, we have the issues of illicit financial frauds that also contribute. A whole chunk of corruption is coming also from the illicit financial frauds, where people, they do not also want to pay tax. Countries like Africa, you do not want to pay tax, and then you sit there and you wait that donors will come and give you money when you yourself is not even paying tax. 1. 2, you are smuggling money out of countries like, for instance, Malawi. Malawi is already a poor country. Then somebody is smuggling money out, being aided by a Malawian. What is that? Is that not corruption? Secondly, there's this whole issue of, in the system, somebody mentioned, but of course in a very diplomatic way, because we have diplomats inside here, that even to get a job for women, you have to be corrupted somehow. And somehow usually is sexual violence. And it is happening in our city. Is that not indirect corruption? Where somebody is saying, I give you a job, you do this. You do this to me, I will do this to you. It's not only nepotism, it's beyond that. It is corruption, because that is the start of corruption, and then at the end of it all, it becomes sexual violence, especially when it is women. When it is men, it is simply corruption. You pay more, you get a better job. Really, and I ask my questions to say, these poor people in the villages, will they ever get a job? Because they do not know anyone in the system. They are in the village. It becomes a vicious circle of poverty. Well, these people have no one to turn to. But me, Emma, has someone to turn to when I can be able to do that corruption because I have money. So there are all these things that were very well connected. When you see them, they are very well connected, but they impact negatively on women and girls. They impact negatively on children. They impact negatively on the disabled. And we do not want to see that. At times we pretend that we do not see. As women in Africa, I think it is time to rise up and say no to corruption. When we associate ourselves to corruption, it is bad for generations to come. Because for me today, I'm saying, okay, I'm already maybe 50, 60, I'm going to die very soon. But what about those that are coming behind us? If we institutionalize corruption, us as women, then it is bad. Let us reject corruption. Corruption is evil to all of us, especially women and girls and the young children. We can see it, that many people are dying in Africa because we have not been able to prevent corruption. And I don't know what is interesting to be very corrupt and you are even proud that I'm so corrupt. Even if you know that I'm corrupt, you are not even ashamed of what you are doing. So for me, I'm saying women are the least corrupt in Africa, and I hope that we'll continue to be like that, and that we'll reject corruption that even comes in form of sexual violence. We'll reject it and say, no, we do not want this. Some of the things were already covered, but I'm saying we want to give a lot of time to delegates also to contribute, and I'm not going to go so much deep, but I will start responding to some of the questions once they come from the floor. Submit.
Another round of applause for Mama Emma. Thank you. Abigail, Mama Emma has raised a number of issues, but mainly focused on the public sector. Can you expand more on how corruption in the public sector undermines women's rights?
Okay, so good morning to everybody. Good morning. It seems we are not very interested in what we are doing. Good morning. Thank you, Mama Emma, for that. I want to raise a few questions that...
I think...
I am just raising a few questions that begs asking. And as women, as people working in anti-corruption, people and gender activists here, these are basically issues that we are all aware about, and also how these affect us as human beings and the road to development for Africa as we all want it. So the main speaker speaks about how the very gendered nature of the impacts of corruption on our lives. And I just always want to take it from a personal point of view. So how do I experience corruption in my country in a lot of ways, and how my work and my experiences with other women show me the extent to which corruption has impacted lives and the detrimental nature it is for especially women and girls. And in this, I want to also bring attention to the fact that let's be aware that already the socioeconomic systems, the structures that we operate are very patriarchal. So already women are unnecessarily affected by the politics, the kind of socioeconomic systems that we run. And so when we bring in corruption, we realize that it's for women and women's rights, it's a more double jeopardy story that we are telling. That on a normal basis, women are excluded from land ownership. Women are excluded from being part of decision making on its own. And then when you bring in issues around how corruption affects their life, then you realize that yes, when corruption is endemic in a country or in a system, every citizen, both men and women, experience it. It affects our lives, it affects our development and our work, our well-being. But as women and the way our systems are run, we are affected in a more severe way, if I will put it. So in relation to what she raises around public service and public institutions, I, for one, I work in Ghana on a project that is basically aimed at working with accountable democratic systems to strengthen them in the fight against corruption. So in Ghana, what we call the Addis project deals with two things. So the upward stream is where we are dealing with legal reform, engaging public service and the public sector to effect to put in place normative regimes, but also legal systems and structures that helps in the fight against corruption. That is very pro-anti-corruption and also sanctions corruption, because the issues that we raise mostly are around let's make the laws work, but when we have good laws, the issue around enforcement and sanctioning of corruption is what I believe we need to take forward. And so that's the kind of work we do. And then on the downstream, we work with local communities, citizens, empower them, bring knowledge to them enough that they will begin to demand accountability from duty bearers, from public service office holders. So that's the kind of work we do. And I'm just talking from my experience in engaging the public sector and public institutions in my country. Yes, corruption is very endemic in a lot of ways. So we find that in our country, women experience corruption in very diverse ways. So on the political sphere, we have very corrupt political cultures where it's very not sensitive to gender-specific issues. So in politics in Ghana, you have winner takes all, and you have decision-making systems, even inter-party, in political parties, that are not encouraging women to be in the forefront of political decision-making. So when you bring this up into where they now get power and public appointments, you find that the issue of gender become less and less a consideration for decision makers. And for women to actively be part of it, that is where you have the systems of corruption, the very gendered nature of corruption, where sometimes sex is used as a currency in corruption. You exchange sex for even having your name on the ballot for even a position in the party, first and foremost. And then you come into governments where political appointments are now based on who's related to who, and then even that's some systems are in place where, because the systems are not based on merit, people extort and use corrupt ways to get their way. And because women also have come to a place where we also want a seat at the table, women are forced to exchange sex, fight hard to be where they want to be. In looking for jobs, for instance, in my country, because unemployment is so high now, you find young people being abused sexually also. They'll go for an interview. They're very good, but the person with the power is saying, you're really beautiful. I have a young lady friend who said, actually, they told me I'm overqualified for the job, but the man said, well, I can consider you if you can meet me in this hotel. So she asked him, why do I need to meet you in a hotel when I'm overqualified for a job that I just want to do? And the man said, well, yeah, I can disqualify you because you're overqualified. And so they keep having this discussion, and the lady said, okay, can I be upfront with you? What do you want me to meet you in the hotel for? And he says, you should know. So these are things that women experience, but also there's a system and a culture that it so encourages the shaming these kind of things. So women are low-key doing these things, but they can't talk about it. They can't bring it to the table, because then a fellow woman or a fellow colleague will ask you, why did you do it? And so it begins to spread. Oh, she got her job not because she's qualified for, but because she slept with somebody. But this is somebody just literally reporting that I have been abused. I have somebody's using the power to extort these kinds of things from me. So I find that women on every level in our polity experience corruption so much that it's about time at these forums and at these meetings to actually be very specific about how we experience these kinds of corruption, and then begin to go to the very roots of how to deal with it. So in my program, for instance, we work with citizen groups, and we call them citizen groups because they are very local to the communities. These are activists that are working on different issues in their community, and we bring them together to form a group that we work with to now begin to demand accountability from their local administration. So for instance, you go to a place, the road systems are not working well. Hospitals, or what we call in our country, CHIPS compounds, are built. They are not, given the infrastructure to work. So women and children are not able to access healthcare. So we use these sorts of information about empowering women around who is responsible for this kind of work in your community. Where do you go to ask questions? What kind of questions to ask us? What we found also that in these groups is a mixture of men and women, and we make sure that to form a very viable citizen groups, they are representation for women and youth groups who are able to advance their causes. And you find that in a lot of ways, the experiences that they bring to the table makes things move, not as much as we want it, but by empowering them, we find that they're able to make better decisions for themselves. They're able to find out what is going on, go to the right sources for the right kinds of information. So I believe that we, as people who have access to different sorts of forums like this, are able to bring these things to the fore and allow for a dialogue as this, but also begin to think around the very specific nature we can help eliminate corruption and also empower women in the fight against corruption. Thank you.
Another round of applause for Abigail. Abigail brought in another dynamic of the support system that is available for victims of corrupt practices. And more often, we don't see sexual exploitation as a form of corruption. And I feel we need to raise this to high on the agenda of corruption. We discuss corruption in conference halls, but we don't break down what this means for our women and girls. Emma spoke about the cash gate. I always wonder when you tell my grandmother that we've lost $10 billion, she won't understand. And it's the same story every day in each and every country. I believe we need to start breaking down what this 10 billion means. We need to start telling public officials, for example, when they steal the money that is meant to drill a borehole in a village, and how that impacts on the girl child. This keeps the girl child out of school. It exposes her to risk of rape because now she has to walk long distances to get water. When we do not have drugs in our hospitals, it's our women who suffer more to take care of the sick and the elderly. And most often we see this as care work, but this is actually labor. We need to see it as unpaid labor and not as unpaid care work, because there's no care in walking long distances to get water for the family. I want us to have an honest conversation, building on what the two have said. And feel free to contribute. Feel free to ask a question to the panelists, and feel free to ask a question to anyone in the audience. I'll take the first question, and I'll ask one person from the audience. Madame Charity. Emma spoke about the cash gate, and this is money that was stolen through a system that was supposed to increase transparency, the IFMIS system. This is not only an experience in Malawi, we've seen it in different countries. And we are seeing strengthening systems as a means of increasing transparency and accountability. I just would like to know what your take is on this. How public officials are using systems that are supposed to strengthen accountability to further corrupt practices. Can we have a mic in the audience? Yeah,
okay. Thank you, first and foremost, to Madam Emma for her presentation, as well as the young lady from Ghana there. I think you've brought and raised issues that are really key and affecting our continent. And specifically coming to your question on perhaps strengthening systems and how some government officials are misusing the systems, I wish to start by saying that one of the aspirations under Agenda 2063 is to strengthen institutions of governance, to make them more transparent, accountable, and ensure that they deliver to the expectations. Now, when you have a system that is transparent, is accountable, and all the loopholes have been closed, even when you have a person who is prone to corruption occupy that position, the system itself would deter that person. So we need systems that are strengthened in all our institutions, different sector and all. And once we have that, I think it will be a key ingredient in ensuring that there is transparency, so that those people who naturally do not have integrity of their own, at least the system will put checks and balances on them. But also, I think I want to take it a step further and say that leadership in these institutions is very, very key. You can raise that to the highest levels. For instance, when a head of state in a country has said no to corruption, and they mean it, and they stand by it, you'll find that even the other people, the ministers and everyone going down, they'll toe the bar, because they'll be following the leader who has put in place a firm stand against corruption. So much as we need the systems, we also need to ensure that leadership is of integrity. We have leaders who believe in the fight against corruption, and they mean it not just as a political rhetoric, but they mean it in essence. When there's an issue in their government, they're able to stand up and take action regardless of who is involved. So that political commitment and leadership is quite key, in addition to the strengthened systems in our different countries. Thank you so much. I hope I've attempted to answer your question. Thank you.
Thank you, Charity. The floor is open. I can see a hand at the back. back.
Oh, okay. Sorry. Let me use it. Good afternoon. Good morning, everybody. Thank you so much, the panelists, for very timely and very good presentation. My question and comment, it's, and I'm really happy I'm raising it in a forum like this, is that thinking about this discussion today on corruption and women's rights is bringing to mind years back when we were all, my name is Uche Idoko, sorry. My name is Uche Idoko from Nigeria. It's bringing to mind those days we were all working towards having gender-responsive budgeting mainstreamed in our different country budgeting system. Because for me, it's a preventive to corruption. And I think that's why most of our government and policymakers fought it hard, and so many countries that were progressing started retrogressing, except Uganda and Rwanda and some other countries in Africa. Because this will make it very clear which money belongs to which gender. For example, our needs are costed, and we follow it up, and it's passed to budget, and we track and monitor and make sure it's done. And then when the money is missing, it's easy to track and then publish. But when we are talking without these needs costed, and there's no data to back up these things, it's difficult for even redemption. So I think we need to reawaken our drive towards gender-responsive budgeting again, and think about it in line with corruption and women's rights in Africa, and think towards it through preventive and even curative or redemption, because whistleblowing for both gender is dangerous. And then, like my sister from Ghana rightly said, then bringing women with all the double violence we are already going through into it without facts, but through this system of budgeting, it will be mainstream into policy making. Everybody is seeing it and it's clear. And then every year, for example, as women in Africa, we can get the numbers from different countries and say, this is what haven't been done, and this is how the money went. For example, the report that we all refer to, the Beki's report, you don't have gender, there's no gender analysis on which money, where they went, and where are they coming from. And you can also pardon the report because we don't have those monies in these clusters. Thank you.
Thank you, Chena. I'll move to the gentleman at the back.
Thank you very much.
Kindly
Good morning,
tell us
everyone.
Your name and your country of origin.
Okay. I'm Bright. So I'm from Ghana. I work for the Ghana Anti-Corruption Coalition. First, I'd like to say a big thank you to the AGA for this forum. One of the things I've noticed here is that I think at least of what the people gathered here, at least 30% are men. It used to be that when you go to programs where gender is the theme, you find an all-women session with only one man in there. I'm not sure what his role was, but it was typically all women. And thank you for the presentation, Madam Emma Kalia and Abigail. I think what we've actually established here is that if you look at political issues, look at social issues, look at economic issues, the basket of opportunities of rights for women is relatively more reduced as compared to their male counterparts. And a big factor for that is the issue of corruption. Now, we also call in on a lot of the agents that we think have the power to make change. And I'd like to narrow that agency to that of the ordinary woman. getting into office is becoming a lot more expensive. One reason why it's been explained that we are not seeing a lot more women being able to rise into elected office. In my country, the research suggests that if you want to become a member of parliament, you need a minimum of $150,000 to be able to effectively campaign. A lot of that money really is spent on actually vote buying and other forms of electoral corruption. Now, I'm also aware that in my country, even the few women who get elected to those positions, the hardest part of the job is sustaining being in office. In other words, mostly after a first term, you see a situation where they are booted out of office. And so when I mentioned the agency of the ordinary woman, I mentioned her agency as her having voting rights. Now, the issue I find quite difficult to understand is that in most of the countries on our continent, Ghana, for example, we are 52% women compared to 48% of men, which means that, you know, the women are more than men. And when you talk about vote, yet you consistently find situations where when we have to elect people into office and women candidates are standing, you don't find them getting a lot of those votes. So we can call on government, we can call on all kinds of agencies, but let's also begin to look at the issues for the ordinary woman there who has to vote to put somebody into an elected office. I'm not saying vote, you know, for somebody who is a woman, even if you think they are more qualified candidates compared to that person. But I think there's also a cultural trend there where even for women, they are quite uncomfortable seeing other women in office. And we need to start working at how we can educate and get rid of this cultural bit of it. And I think that's also a big, big, big block, you know, to be able to basically empower women politically. And we need to have a discussion on that. Thank you.
Thank you. Go. Kindly, in 1 minute.
Yes, please. In charge of the financing development. And the second question is to Madam Emma, with regards, which is also actually a little bit in line with what the Minister just said about women not helping in the development of equality. And I'll give two very quick examples. For example, today there was a law that was passed in Tunis with regards to equality in inheritance. And just a year ago, 53% of women opposed that law, while it's actually beneficial for them. Another example is from Libya, where they've tried to give women the same rights, women that marry foreign men, so non-Libyan men, give them the same rights as women that marry Libyan men, especially with giving their nationality to their children. So women that marry non-Libyan men right now cannot give their nationality to their children. And here again, the biggest opposition for this law were women and not the men. So I'm curious to what your experience is with this and what your ideas are for changing this. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Very good questions. We'll take two more. I'll go to the director.
Thank you, moderator. Thank you so much. Let me also thank my sister Emma. I know her for a very long time. So I'm happy to hear from her. And Abigail, thank you so much for a very interesting discussion. Mine, moderator, is not a question. It's just, I'm going to make two comments, briefly, on the issues that they have both raised. First, on the, I think the point they're making, we should not lose sight of it, both of them, that corruption is not only confined to the public sphere. Let's disabuse ourselves of that notion and have an open mind that in order to fight this scourge, we need to look in the private sector, public sector, even the NGO. I like what she emphasized, even the NGO sector. I think both of them are great. So let's take that as a take home. Second point, Chair, is in fact, while we're still on the first of the three spheres, the issue of multinational corporations is critical. The issue of multinational corporations and their involvement in corruption on the continent is very important. The Mbeki, somebody referred to the Mbeki panel on illicit financial flows. It's a very important report that we should all study and read the recommendations, because it tells us that every year Africa loses through illicit financial flows out of the continent between $50 million and $150 million. Million. Is it billion? Billion. It's even billion for that matter. That's even scary. I thought it was a million. Billion, then that's even scary. So it tells us that what multinational corporations are doing is bad for this continent, and not only for corruption, but also for women's rights. So let's focus on that. Finally, moderator, also I would like to encourage us to also study the Transparency International Anti-Corruption Perception Index of 2017. Just study that and see what it tells us. In Africa, it tells us that there are countries that are really doing well, including this one here. So let's study what they're doing, which is good. Botswana, Seychelles, Cape Verde, Rwanda, Namibia, Mauritius, all of them. We need to study what it is they're doing, which is good, that can be learned by others. Because the same index of 180 countries globally, the bottom 5 African countries are as follows. At the very bottom, 180, you have Somalia. Next Somalia, 179, we have South Sudan. 175, we have Sudan. 171, we have Libya. 171 again, occupying the same spot as Libya, is Guinea-Bissau. Now, you see those countries. Now, we have to say, what's going on here? And what needs to be resolved in these 5 countries to come closer to the other top 5? You will see that those are embroiled in war or conflict or misgovernance. So we need to address those issues of peace, building strong governance institutions, and also tackling corruption and issues of human rights at the same time. So I wanted just to make those 2 points, moderator, and appreciate the presentations, really, a great deal.
Thank you very much. I'll take 2 more. There was a hand at the back. Can we have the lady on the extreme on my right?
Okay, my name is Sophie Mkwena. I'm the foreign editor at the South African Broadcasting Corporation. I'm a journalist. I just want to say, I think for the continent to strengthen its fight against corruption, we have to strengthen the institutions. Indeed, that is correct. And one pillar, important pillar of democracy is the media. We must ensure that the AU supports media organizations on the continent, because they can provide a platform for perhaps whistleblowers to talk about their experiences, but also to communicate a message that says we are a continent that will shun corruption. We spoke about illicit financial flow, the report compiled by our former South African President, Thabo Mbeki. I think we have to remember at all times as Africans where we come from and why are we in this situation we find ourselves. It is because of our colonizers. But as we do that, we must then say, we are now free. What is it that we are supposed to do as Africans to ensure that we build a better Africa? We can only build a better Africa if we can utilize Africa's resources correctly to the benefit of its citizens, particularly women and children who are most vulnerable. Therefore, the suggestion that there should be regional institutions within the AU that deals with corruption should be a proposal or a resolution that must come from this gathering and be adopted at the AU summit in January. It shouldn't just be a talk or a suggestion. It must be a resolution to say we want our heads of state in January to adopt a resolution that before end of 2019, they will set up institutions in all the regions of Africa that deals with corruption. 2, it must be credible people with track record. Secondly, wars and conflict are a recipe for corruption because no one can be held accountable. Therefore, the move by the AU to silence the gun should be taken seriously. And those countries that are not willing to ensure that there's peace and stability in their respective countries must be called out and be punished for failure to ensure that there's peace and stability in the respective countries because it is a recipe for corruption. Judiciary, we must ensure as a continent that at the continental level, we support the judiciary on the continent. And therefore, AU must move with speed to ensure that the body or the committee that deals with judiciary on the continent is given teeth, but also is strengthened, because you can only fight corruption if it's reported and there's punishment. And judiciary, the responsibility is to ensure that those who are practicing corruption are held to account. For an example, in South Africa, the Commission right now, if it wasn't a strong institution like the Public Protector's Office led by the then Public Protector, Thuli Madonsela, we wouldn't be having this commission. The judge is chairing that commission. We expect the recommendations of that commission to be taken seriously by South African government for implementation, and those who are responsible or fingered be held to account. But Africa must monitor that process so that they can learn, or the same processes can be replicated in different countries where there is corruption. But there must be a political will. If we have leaders who are corrupt, who are not willing to build this continent, it's all about themselves and their families, and we applaud them, we feel they are our heroes, we will not be able to root out corruption. And unfortunately, women and children, they are vulnerable.
Thank you so much. I'll take one last question or comment. I'll take it from the lady at the very back. Be brief, please.
Okay. Hello, my name is Nassima Hanafi from Algeria. I would like first to thank the panelists for their intervention and for sharing with us their knowledge and experience. My question is for all the panelists. Is about, they also always say that to eradicate corruption, and especially gender corruption, we should empower women and give them access to high position in the government. My question is, do you think that this solution shouldn't be related to one condition, that we should empower the right women and we should give access to the right women to high position in the government? Because in my, from my experience, I saw a lot of cases where women were had access to a high position in the government because it was easy to manipulate them and easy to intimidate them. Thank you.
Thank you so much. The very last one will go to a man, and this is not about patriarchy. My friend from Botswana, from Zimbabwe. From Botswana.
I'm from Botswana, but I don't mind even if you say I'm from Zimbabwe. They are my neighbor, no? They're my neighbor, so we have relationship with Northern Botswana, Zimbabwe. But I just also want to echo the same sentiment shared by the other director without the general, and the lady who spoke before, the one who spoke last, about strong institutions. I think my friend Leonard Doctor asked us, what is it that we are doing differently in Botswana that we can actually share with people? I think from the onset, I think let me just make a qualification. It's not that Botswana is better than all the rest of you guys. I think sometimes it's also an issue of your history, your background. It also plays a role. So there's also an element of luck. I'm a former police officer, so I used to tell the guys on patrol that sometimes luck also helps in you solving cases, being at the right time, right place, when something bad happens for you to actually do. And it's an element that scholars, highly educated people don't want to dismiss it. They say, no, don't forget about luck. You can't sit at home and think about luck. Luck is a factor. You need to factor it. It's okay, but that is it's a discussion for the other. So our history, we were a British colony, and we were declared a desert simply as a route from Cape to Cairo. So, and then our independence, the way they handed it to us, with no struggle, nothing, so there was homogeneity. And then immediately they left, we discovered the diamonds. And then by then we've already had the rules, the legal frameworks and everything to actually say, how do we now move ourselves from such a dry... So when you have all those governing things, even people who steal, they know that you are watching them, and they know that when people get an opportunity, they will get nailed. I think that is one of the most critical things. Institute, don't just talk about it, say it, practice it. And also the other thing is the issue of governance in the ministries. Corruption is not a function of the anti-corruption agencies to actually say it. People, you need to speak in the language that the people understand. Here in Botswana, one of the things that government actually did to do, which was the greatest thing, is the prevention of corruption by developing rural areas, so that we don't have an influx of people coming from rural areas coming to town, because everything that they can get from Gaborone is in where they stay. I think those are some of the things that we are. The very minor simplistic things that starts with the ministries, that the permanent secretary in the Ministry of Finance must deal with administrative things like nepotism before they report to them to DCEC. And it is that understanding that it is not the anti-corruption agencies that can actually do with it. Issues of home affairs, women and gender, what are they actually doing? You heard when I was starting, when I was giving photo of things, I said, it starts with us. At DCC right now, what I simply do is that when you look at countries, it's exciting to always, we also have names. You can imagine, people are saying we are number one in the continent. But people in this country still call us toothless dogs. They call us all names of things because of it's not that there's no corruption. But the secret is that they might accuse us for not chasing big fish, but small fish. But I can tell you, a conglomerate of small fish will even double the bigger fishes. So I think the most important thing is that to start at the ministry so that there is good issues of governance to actually every ministry in itself is a center of an anti-corruption. Because if you say it's only one agency, people who do corruption say, let me see how these guys will come and do. They'll come with all these techniques. And the last one, I know you are pressed for time, but the most important that I want you to actually underline is the issue of transnational organized crime. Is the issue of seeing the whole, the ability for all of us fighting corruption to see the whole. You need to see the relationship. What is the relationship of gender-based violence, corruption, vis-a-vis its relation to issue of global warming, the issue of hunger, the issue of resources, the drinking of resources. All this are connected. We can sit here and talk about women and gender, but if we don't understand what is it that we need to do to make sure that there is energy in Africa to actually do this? So we need to see the whole. If we can't see the whole, then we're having a problem. Because when we start to be inside, like sometimes I tell my colleagues, the other permanent secretaries, you are so inundated, so overburdened by issues of energy that you don't see corruption. In our investigation, we realized that TINOC, which is an abbreviation for transnational organized crime, are actually now taking advantage of our inability to see the whole. They are like wedges in between the ministry, and they're actually facilitating politically exposed persons because they know how to hide their money. So politically exposed persons sign up contracts, the criminals hide money for them. So we have a virus, a very strong virus that if we are not careful, will be at each other's throat. So we need to understand the issue of complexity. Don't just simplify things.
Thank you, thank you. I think you've made a very important point of looking corruption in the wider sense, not only looking at what's happening at the country level. We need to go across borders. A lot of issues have been raised. I'll ask my panelists to respond to some of them. There was an issue of protection of whistleblowers. There's an issue around judiciary. There's an issue around gender-responsive budgeting, budgets and data. How do we track this? Are we really costing the needs of women?
Thank you, moderator. Thank you for the comments and the questions. Most of them were like comments, but I think I need to talk to the issue of gender-responsive budgeting. It was one of the issues that I was going to finish with. That's quite important. However, like you had already indicated, it still has a problem. You can allocate resources to where the resources should be allocated, for instance, strategic and we call them strategic and practical needs. But if there's still someone stealing, they will still steal the money. They will still get it. But it is about the issue of enforcing laws. Are we able to enforce laws like the Director General has said? Are there people who are following on these people who are stealing? Are people made to account for the money that they have stolen? If we can't do that, they will continue stealing the same money in the name of implementation when there's nothing that they're implementing. I think it's important. Gender-responsive budgeting, good for all of us, but if there's still someone in the system that is stealing every day, the money will not reach where it is supposed to reach. The issue about my sister from Libya talked about the issue of citizenship. She also talked about the way the opposing of laws. We have a similar law in Malawi, the Citizenship Act, dates back to sometimes back, maybe 1930, I don't understand. But we still have a similar problem, not that the women are opposing, but it has not been reviewed until today. It simply talks about if you are married to a foreigner, me, a woman, I should be able to after 1 year, I should be able to pronounce my citizenship and say, I'm going to belong here and not here. You see, but for a man marrying a foreigner, there is no issue. And the justification at that time was, if I marry, for instance, we are very close to Zambia, if I marry a Zambian, maybe that man will be what do you call people who come and confuse other countries. I don't want to use the bad name, but people who can only come to destabilize our country. So men can do that, women cannot do. In their view that time, they thought women cannot do, but the men can do. Meaning that at the end of it all, the children become stateless. So it is the same, and it is a problem. But that is pure patriarchy. Secondly, the issue about opposing. Those who were in Addis Ababa in 2003, if they remember, when we were discussing the last discussion about the protocol in Addis, when now they were coming to adopt it in Maputo, I remember 2 women from one country I'm not going to mention, women were saying, and men in that room were saying, that member states who encourage monogamous marriages are like encouraging polygamous what? Marriages. 2 women stood up and said, we are opposing that, let the polygamous system just continue. Can you imagine? Polygamous is not good for women. But there were the same women who were saying, no, we are reserving on that. And they reserved. They said, we are reserving. If this room continues to talk about monogamous marriages, as we are reserving, we have to go back home and consult. This is a woman who is saying that. So you can see the invisible hand of patriarchy at work. invisible. You don't see that hand, but it works on behalf of others where we are gathered like this. So it's not that they want it that way. It is the system of socialization that has made, and they continue to be what they are, and it is difficult to break that. And therefore, we should keep speaking to that until people start understanding that patriarchy has also to stop. And that is the time when women will start understanding that they should support things that are good for them, for their children, for generations to come. The other bit was the issue, I picked this when my brother was talking about the history of the British. We're also from a British colony, Malawi, Kenya, Zimbabwe, Zambia, many other countries. But I remembered one thing. I may bring you back to history to say, isn't it that the SAPs also contributed to this? Structural adjustments programs. In my country, when that came, that program came, I do recall very well that people even started sharing state property. Pure corruption, just sharing, not paying anything, and they take it, they take this company, they take that company, they give it to their colleague, they give it to their sister, to their brother, just. And I'm like, contribute to the system of corruption. Okay. Nobody was accounting to anyone. And therefore, for me, if I look back, I still remember that maybe that was the time when we started legitimizing corruption, and people felt they can continue doing it without shame, and they've done it, they are doing it today. They get state property, and they start sharing for very little money. They even buy cars, a 4x4 car. They can buy it at 3,000 kwacha. In Malawi, 3,000 kwacha is almost $4. 4x4 car, yes. In a government system, 4x4 car, they say they have offroad, they have boarded it off, and they buy it at 3,000 kwacha. And it all comes from that system where we were saying, can you hear me? Where we are saying it is now, everything has to be managed. This also brought in the system of where the open contracting. The open contracting is good, but the same open contracting is what is allowing also chaos if we don't see. That's where it allows chaos, where you have the open contracting. Yes, it invites transnational companies to come. It invites multinationals. It invites people who have no capacity to deal with issues, for instance, construction of roads. Well, it's open contracting, so what? If they qualify, if they can write a good document like this one, even if they cannot speak to that document, they have written a good one, it will pass and they will get a contract to go and construct a road when they have no civil engineer in that group. These are the things that are happening, and it is really legitimizing corruption, but it came from somewhere I did not know. Now is when I'm realizing that they did this for purpose, so that they can properly do proper corruption without people questioning, because it will be in the name of open what? Contracting. Likewise, the SAPs, it is in the name of governments should not manage companies. Companies should be managed by private sector, so that the whole issue of corruption can be done even properly, because it has been legitimized, it has been put into the open space where everybody can compete. These things I see today in my country, I speak to this and I tell people, oh yeah, this is the way you got this for free, a government property for free, and today it is proper legitimized corruption and nobody cares.
Thank you, my sister. Thank you. Abigail, something to add in 1 minute?
Okay, yeah, so I will pick from just one comment that was made around women's agency and talk to the fact that I always say that everything that we do in this fight against corruption, even in development, it starts with us. And so as a woman, if somebody can bring up an issue, a policy that works for everyone, but you as a woman are not able to bring yourself to a place where you understand that this is about me seeing the whole, seeing the bigger picture, and so supporting women's agency on your own, then that's where we begin to start. The issues around gender advocacy, empowerment of women, and gender rights. Because in as much as we can work for laws and systems to work, it is us as citizens, as women, who will again advocate for these implementation, ensure that these are implemented. And so I will go back to the point that one contributor said, that is it a matter of that when the interlinkages between more women being in power and the correlation with corruption. And so there's a correlation between women are not more corrupt. And so them being in power allows for less corruption. That's a bigger argument I'm not sure I want to get into, but there is some evidence to show that this is true. And so we want to encourage that. But to say that, is it a matter of just empowering all women or the right women, then it begs the question, who is the right woman? In the sense that until we are all empowered, then we're able to say, in this field, this woman is better. In this field, this woman is better. But if we have women in general not empowered, not educated, lacking access to these very spaces that they can make these very important inputs, then we cannot even question who is the right woman. Because in politics, you will find that women are not represented. In economics, in business, we are not there. But if you find that there's the same playing field for men and women, then the question about who is right or wrong is not the issue. It's about the most competent. And I, for one, believe that you would find in those spaces, when we have created empowered women enough, that it won't even be about we want more women in, but it will be about the competent person. And most often than not, I believe that when women are given the education, the empowerment, they are able to do more. And so then it will be easier to even get these affirmative action issues off the table, because everyone will be on the same page and will begin to work on the same playing field. So I believe corruption and women's issues are very interlinked, but for us to actually begin to break it down to the different levels and begin to put in implementation strategies that are very targeted to the very experiences that women have, both in politics, both in economics, and in the justice system. That's when we begin to see a change. Thank you.
Thank you, Abigail. I'll just respond to what was directed to Oxfam and what Oxfam is doing around budget and gender-responsive budgeting. To begin with, Oxfam is working with Femnet in Africa to train members of parliament when it comes to gender-responsive budgeting, and sharing with different members of parliament on the best practices. So far, we're looking at the examples of Uganda, Rwanda, and Uruguay, and how this has impacted more on women. The next training, I think it will be sometime in February for the Pan-Africa Parliament, specifically for the Finance and Monetary Affairs Committee and the Gender Committee. Apart from that, Oxfam also runs a campaign titled Fiscal Justice for Women and Girls, looking at how we raise resources and spend the same resources in a manner that is responsive to the rights and needs of women and girls. Other than that, I think most of you, maybe you will see a report Oxfam invests in research. There is a report around tax battles, a dangerous race to the bottom, and this speaks to how multinationals are playing our governments and leading to a race to the bottom. We also expose multinationals. For instance, I think 3 months ago, we released a report about the 5 big pharmaceutical companies and how they've captured state policies, how they are cheating our governments of the resources that we need to invest in advancing the rights of women and girls. So just in brief. Before I conclude the session, I'd like to give 1 minute to the Ambassador of Ghana to conclude the session.
Thank you, Mr. Moderator. I'm not really concluding, but I feel that I have to say something. Corruption, it can be a very emotional debate. But to me, the bottom line is education. You take our cultural practices, for instance. Women are relegated to the background. In most cultural, or in most villages, hamlets, women are only like children to be seen, but not to be heard. It will take education for us to break from that cultural practice. Now, the policeman who is taking bribe, or the public servant who is taking money under the table, does he know that that money that he's taking is depriving a young child somewhere from going to school, or a road being constructed, or for that matter, potable water being made available for mothers and children? We need education. We can have all the rules. We can have all the laws. But if the people are not educated, the woman at the village, does she know what corruption is? No. What is corruption? How does she report somebody who is taking bribe if she doesn't even know, she doesn't have the concept of what corruption is? So to me, the bottom line is education, education, education. Thank you.
I think education, education, education. Just to conclude, key things came out of this particular session. As the final speaker said, education, education, education. We need to change the culture. And it's only through the educating our citizens that we'll be able to make them understand the impact of that bribe they are taking or the bribe they are giving on our people, especially women and girls. It was also said that we should look at corruption not only as a function of the anti-corruption institutions, but we need to look at it from a diverse point of view. We need to not only consider corruption in the, but also we have to look at the private sector, we have to look at the multinationals, we have to look at the NGOs, we have to look at ourselves as citizens. Someone said we should not only look at the person taking the bribe, but we should also look at the one giving. Madam Charity reminded us that, yes, we can put systems in place, but it takes leadership and integrity for those systems to work. There's a link between corruption. When we look at the Transparency International Index, which we were asked to study very carefully, and director listed the countries at the very bottom. So there's a clear link between corruption and conflict. And I'm sure maybe most of us watched that documentary from South Sudan called The Profiteers. And we see how much South Sudan is losing as a result of the conflict and corrupt public officials. There's need to protect whistleblowers. We are seeing nowadays a lot of anti-corruption campaigns being run on social media. But as much as these scandals are being exposed on social media, our governments are also coming up with means of making social media more expensive. We are seeing bloggers' taxes being introduced. We are seeing social media taxes. We are seeing a lot of levies being levied on the internet. So we really need to look at how we strike the balance between raising domestic resources to finance our development and how this is also impacting on the fight against corruption. A lot was said on how corruption in the public sector affects our women and girls and exposes them to more risks, and also how the judicial system reinforces the discriminatory practices of our own societies towards women and girls. Without any further ado, I'd like to ask you to applaud our panelists. Thank you, Emma. Thank you, Abigail. I'd like to hand over to Ibrahim for further direction.
Thank you very much. Shall we put our hands together for the moderator, Joab? Thank you very much. If you look at the printed program, we had listed another colleague as the moderator of that session. We went to Joab at midnight yesterday, and I think he has done a very good job in helping to moderate this session. So please, let's put our hands together for Joab again. Thank you very much. This session, the keynote session, as you all imagine, is supposed to give us a general overview of many of the issues that we will delve into more in depth over the next few sessions that we would have today and the ones that we would have tomorrow. So I think that if some of us feel that we've not had sufficient time to discuss these issues, we should not worry, we should not bother. We have a whole session dedicated to the issues of normative framework and institutions. We have an entire session dedicated to the issue of how do we build consciousness. So we're looking at issues of education, we're looking at issues of information across all levels. And we're also looking at issues of reporting. I know that there was, I think the first question talked about gender responsive budgeting. There is an entire session looking at the issue of gender responsive, reporting mechanisms, and I think that covers broadly issues around accountability and all of that. So that would be the session this morning. We would break for tea for about 15-20 minutes. Tea is served right on my left side there. You come out of the hall, you walk down. It's just an open foyer there. We would have tea. It's something we should do over the next 15-20 minutes so that we come back for the session just before lunch. Thank you very much for the interaction this morning. I think that the conversation is already picking up, and we're excited that we would have a very fun-filled and very robust engagement for the rest of the day. Thank you very much. Tea served. Want to go all the way? We don't want tea? Yeah, I think we should have tea so that we stretch our legs, we become a lot more energetic for the next sessions. Thank you.
Probably they are Nigerians who are saying they are Ghanaians.
I think so. Nigerians are.
We don't do sightings outside our country. We are more disciplined. We do such probably they are. You know, if you meet a Ghanaian,